I still remember the exact sound my older brother laughed when the FBI agent asked him to repeat his statement. It wasn't nervous, it wasn't forced, it was arrogant. "She's the family screw-up," Brian said, shrugging his shoulders inside my parents' living room. "Trust me, agent, if money disappeared, Emily probably misplaced it." Everyone laughed. My mother laughed. My father smiled into his coffee. Even my sister shook her head like this was just another one of my embarrassing moments. The only person who didn't smile was the woman standing beside the front door wearing a navy blue blazer with a federal badge clipped to her belt. She slowly looked at Brian, then at me. Then she calmly asked the question that changed every life in that room. "Miss Carter." I looked up. "Would you mind identifying yourself for everyone?" I nodded once. "My name is Emily Carter." I paused just long enough for every pair of eyes to settle on me. "Senior financial crimes investigator assigned to the Joint Federal Task Force." The room went dead silent. Brian's smile disappeared. My mother's coffee cup slipped from her fingers. Nobody said another word, because the family joke had just become the lead investigator. But none of that would have happened if I hadn't driven home 3 days earlier, believing I was coming back for my father's retirement barbecue. Instead, I walked straight into the biggest betrayal of my life. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 53 years old. I spent 28 years investigating financial fraud, public corruption, and organized white-collar crime for federal agencies across the United States. Most people imagine investigators chasing gangsters through dark alleys. That wasn't my world. My battlefield was conference rooms, bank records, wire transfers, corporate audits. People lied with paperwork far more often than they lied with guns. And after nearly 3 decades, I learned something that never failed. Money always tells the truth. People don't. Ironically, I never applied that lesson to my own family. Maybe because you never expect the people who raised you to become suspects in your own story. I grew up outside Lexington, Kentucky. Small town, friendly neighbors, Friday night football, church every Sunday. The kind of place where everybody knew your grandparents before they knew you. My dad, Richard, owned a construction supply company. Hardworking, respected, quiet. My mother, Susan, taught elementary school until retirement. Everyone lived her. My older brother, Brian, he was the golden boy, captain of the football team, natural salesman, could walk into any room and have people laughing within 5 minutes. My sister, Ashley, was beautiful, outgoing, and somehow always surrounded by friends. Then there was me, the quiet one. Books instead of parties, math instead of gossip. I'd rather spend a Saturday solving puzzles than shopping at the mall. Dad used to joke, "If Emily ever smiles any bigger, somebody better grab a camera." Everyone laughed, including me. When you're the quiet kid, you learn early that becoming the joke is easier than fighting it. After college, I joined the Treasury Department before eventually moving into federal financial investigations. Because of security requirements, I rarely discussed my work. Not because it was classified every single day, but because discretion becomes second nature. My family interpreted that silence differently. Emily pushes paper, Emily checks spreadsheets, Emily works some boring government desk job. Honestly, I let them believe it. It was easier than explaining complex fraud investigations over Thanksgiving dinner. Every Christmas, someone asked, "So, still doing taxes for Uncle Sam?" I'd smile. Something like that. Brian would laugh. "I don't know how you stare at numbers all day. I'd lose my mind." Everyone chuckled. Nobody ever asked another question. Meanwhile, my career quietly kept growing. I testified in federal court, recovered millions of stolen taxpayer dollars, helped dismantle international fraud rings, and received commendations that stayed locked inside filing cabinets because I never felt the need to impress people, especially family. I thought love wasn't supposed to require resumes. Turns out, respect sometimes does. About 18 months before everything exploded, Dad announced he wanted to retire. 74 years old, bad knees, bad shoulder. He earned it. Brian immediately volunteered to take over the construction business. Nobody questioned it. Why would they? He'd worked there off and on for years. Dad trusted him. Mom adored him. Ashley called him the backbone of the family. I congratulated him. Honestly, I was happy. Until little things started bothering me. Nothing dramatic, just off. Dad suddenly complained about cash flow problems, even though the business had always been profitable. Mom quietly canceled a vacation she'd been planning for years. Brian bought a brand new lifted truck, then another fishing boat, then a lake house. Every time someone asked where the money came from, he'd grin. Business is booming. Dad smiled proudly every single time. Something about that bothered me. Not because people can't become successful, because I spent 30 years listening to people explain money that didn't make sense, and Brian's explanations didn't. Still, I stayed out of it. It wasn't my investigation. It wasn't my business. It wasn't my place. Or at least, that's what I kept telling myself. 3 weeks before Dad's retirement party, Mom called. "Sweetheart, you are coming home, right? I already booked my flight." "Oh, good." She sounded strangely relieved. "Your father really wants the whole family together." I wouldn't miss it. There was a long pause. Then she asked something odd. "You still working for the government?" I laughed. "Last time I checked." "You ever think about retiring?" "Not yet." "Oh." Another pause. "I suppose that's good." Something about her voice stayed with me after we hung up. Not fear, not excitement, just uneasy. When my flight landed in Lexington, Brian picked me up. He hugged me. Hard. Almost too hard. "There she is!" He slapped my shoulder. "Our government superstar." I laughed. "You've never called me that before." He shrugged. People change. As we drove toward town, he kept asking strange questions. "So, you still have access to all those banking systems?" "No." "What exactly do you investigate nowadays?" "A little bit of everything." "You ever look into private businesses?" I looked out the passenger window. "Sometimes." He laughed a little too loudly. "Man, I'd hate to have your job." I smiled politely. "I doubt you're doing anything I'd need to investigate." For just half a second, he didn't answer. Then he forced another laugh. "Yeah, guess not." That silence, I noticed it. Years in investigations teach you something simple. People rarely become uncomfortable without a reason. Dad's barbecue wasn't until Saturday. I arrived Thursday afternoon. The house looked exactly the same. Same white porch, same old oak tree, same basketball hoop hanging crooked above the garage. Walking inside felt like stepping backward 20 years. Mom hugged me. Ashley squealed. Dad smiled from his recliner. For about 30 minutes, everything felt normal. Then Brian received a phone call. He walked outside. Dad immediately stood up. "I'll help him." Both men disappeared together. Mom suddenly started washing already clean dishes. Ashley started scrolling her phone without saying a word. Nobody spoke. The atmosphere changed so quickly it felt rehearsed. I quietly walked toward the kitchen window. Outside, Dad handed Brian a thick manila envelope. Brian opened it, counted something, nodded, then slipped it inside his truck. Dad looked around before walking back inside. The moment he saw me near the window, he froze. Only for a second, then smiled. "You hungry, kiddo?" "Always." He relaxed, but I didn't. That night, I couldn't sleep. Maybe instinct, maybe habit, maybe nothing at all. Around 11, I walked downstairs for water. The study light was on. Voices. Brian, Mom, Dad. The door wasn't fully closed. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I was simply walking past. Then I heard my own name. "Emily can't know." I stopped. Dad sighed. "I don't like hiding this." Brian answered immediately. "We're protecting the family." Mom spoke next. She'd never understand. Brian laughed quietly. Besides, Emily still thinks Dad owns everything. Silence. Then the sentence that made my stomach drop. He'll sign the transfer after the retirement party, and by the time Emily figures anything out, it won't matter. I stood frozen in the hallway. Transfer? What transfer? Dad sounded uncertain. Are we doing the right thing? Brian answered without hesitation. We've come too far to stop now. I slowly stepped backward before the floorboard beneath my foot creaked. Every voice inside the study stopped. I didn't wait. I quietly walked upstairs before anyone opened the door. Lying awake that night, one thought kept circling through my mind. For 28 years, I investigated strangers. For the first time in my life, my instincts were pointing towards my own family. And deep down, I was starting to fear they weren't planning a retirement. They were planning something else, something they desperately hoped I'd never discover.
The next morning, Emily tried convincing herself she had misunderstood what she'd overheard. But years of working financial fraud cases had taught her one thing. When something feels wrong, you verify it. A quiet conversation with her father only deepened her concern. He sounded tired, regretful, almost as if he knew something wasn't right, but couldn't admit it. Then Brian appeared, smiling, confident, watching Emily just a little too carefully. That single glance told her everything. He didn't want her asking questions. Instead of ignoring her instincts, Emily visited the county recorder's office. Every document she reviewed was public, completely legal to access. The paperwork revealed something alarming. Her father's ownership in the family business had been shrinking for months. Brian's share had quietly grown larger with every filing. Each transfer looked ordinary by itself. Together, they formed a pattern Emily had seen countless times during her career, a slow financial takeover. Later that day, an old banker friend confirmed another piece of the puzzle. Brian had been chasing risky business loans that banks refused to approve. Yet, somehow, he was still spending money like it grew on trees. Emily no longer believed these were coincidences. The pieces were starting to fit together. The next day, the family gathered to celebrate her father's retirement after 40 years of honest work. Then, Brian announced one final surprise, a leather binder, one last signature, one simple document. Everyone smiled, everyone applauded, except Emily. She asked one question. What exactly is Dad signing? Brian immediately became defensive. He tried rushing the process. That alone raised every alarm Emily had. Honest people don't pressure someone into signing paperwork. When her father handed her the binder, Emily carefully reviewed every page. At first, everything looked routine. Then she found a hidden clause buried deep inside the contract. One signature would transfer not only the company, but nearly every remaining investment account, including her father's retirement savings. It wasn't retirement paperwork. It was financial surrender. Calmly, Emily exposed every misleading clause in front of the entire family. Brian insisted it was standard legal language. Emily knew better. She had spent 28 years investigating contracts designed to trick elderly business owners. Her father finally realized he had never been told the full truth. When he asked Brian for an explanation, Brian couldn't answer. That silence spoke louder than any excuse. An attorney was called. After reviewing the contract, he confirmed Emily's findings. The agreement protected only one person, Brian. The retirement celebration ended in complete silence. No speeches, no cake, no celebration. Only heartbreak. The next morning, Emily's father apologized. For the first time in her life, he admitted she had been right all along. Weeks later, he rewrote his estate plan, protected his assets, and removed Brian from control. Emily returned to Washington with one lesson she would never forget. The biggest fraud case of her career wasn't committed by strangers. It almost happened inside her own family. Because strangers can steal your money, but only family can make you doubt your own instincts. And sometimes, the most powerful sentence you'll ever say is simply,